Every morning, walking through the gates of school number 137, Artyom felt his insides tighten. He knew that what lay ahead was not lessons, not knowledge, but another ritual of humiliation in which he had a clearly assigned role: the victim. He was 14, thin, with perpetually tousled hair and eyes in which fatigue had settled forever. But the nightmare began even earlier. Right at the school porch, they were waiting for him. Not always the same ones, but there was always someone. They poured dirty water on him from a plastic bucket brought from home, sometimes from puddles, sometimes with leftover food from the trash. He stood clenching his fists, soaked from head to toe, while steam rose from his clothes and skin in the cold November air. Students laughed as they passed. Some took pictures on their phones. Some just looked away. "So, are you ready for lessons, pig?" Gosha threw, spitting at his feet. He didn't answer. There was nowhere to change. He just went to the classroom, smelling of rot, and then sat all day in a wet t-shirt, covered in shame. And then, the toilet. The school toilet became his personal torture chamber. There, between the peeling tiled walls, smelling of urine and bleach, three people regularly waited for Artyom: Gosha, Vadim, and Rusik. They had no reason. They simply chose him, his silence, his loneliness, his unprotesting body. This made them strong. "Well, shall we dive?" Gosha said with a grin, grabbing Artyom by the hair. He tried to break free, but in vain. His face sank into the cold, dirty water. First, screams. Then, silence. Then, laughter. The laughter of those who are allowed everything. He knew no one would help, not even the one who was supposed to protect. One day when the humiliation reached its limit, Artyom decided to ask for help. He went to the school principal, the very person who was supposed to do something. He knocked on the door of his office with his last hope for salvation. When they let him in, he entered, silently peering into the principal's face. "Hello, Sergei Vasilyevich. I need to talk about," he began, but was interrupted by the principal, who did not take his eyes off the documents. "What do you want to talk about?" he muttered without looking up. Artyom already knew the answer, but still continued. "About my classmates. They humiliate me, constantly, in the toilet, during breaks. I don't know what to do." The principal did not even look up from the papers. "This is your problem, Artyom. Figure it out yourself," he said without any emotion. He simply looked away. No sympathy, no reaction. There was not the slightest hint of worry in the director's eyes. It was clear that this was not a problem for him. Artyom felt something breaking inside. He silently turned and left. On the threshold, looking at his back again, he realized they would not help him. Then his world became even darker. One day during a labor lesson, Viktor Stepanovich looked up from his desk and said, "Artyom, go to the board." He stood up, slowly, with a wet collar, smelly clothes, red eyes. He came closer, and as soon as he took a step, he heard from behind, "Oh, look, even the board stinks. Gosha!" Vadim and Rusik came up next. The teacher was sitting in a chair, reading a newspaper. Didn't intervene. Didn't even look. "Now on your knees," Rusik hissed. Artyom tried to step away, but Vadim kicked him sharply in the back. He fell. Then a blow to the stomach, then to the ribs, a boot to the face. He covered his head with his hands, but this only made them angrier. Right in front of the teacher. Right in the classroom, in front of everyone. No one stood up. No one stopped. "That's enough," Viktor Stepanovich said after a couple of minutes, without raising his eyes from the newspaper. "It's too noisy in class." This only amused them. They went to their seats, but Artyom remained lying there. His heart was pounding, his nose was bleeding, his ears were ringing. The board was blurring. That day, Artyom didn't go home. He walked the streets until late in the evening, with a cold head and a burning feeling of emptiness. They didn't save him. They didn't even notice him. He became part of the landscape, like a peeling wall or a broken window in the basement. His pain was invisible and therefore unimportant. The next day, Artyom came to school with a notebook in his hands. He sat on the back desk and was silent. He spent breaks in the classroom. During the last lesson, when the teacher was telling something about lathes, he tore out a sheet of paper, wrote only one word, "Why?" and left. This time he went to the toilet himself, locked himself in, quietly, without hysteria, without fear. They found him half an hour later, unconscious, cut veins, blood in the drain. He survived, but he never returned to school. And only a month later, after an inspection, Viktor Stepanovich was fired, without a scandal, without news, quietly. Just like then, he locked the door. School ended, but the nightmare did not go away. Artyom left through the main exit, not paying attention to the people around him. He knew that he was being watched again, including those who could not leave him alone, even when classes were over. He looked at his hands, which were still bleeding. There was no strength to fight in those hands anymore. Artyom didn't know how much time had passed, but he didn't want to leave his room anymore. He thought that maybe this was just his life now. Dark, cruel, becoming less and less real with each passing day. But suddenly, at the very moment when he almost forgot about everything, he heard a sound, a familiar, unpleasant sound. A knock on the door. He got out of bed looking at it with horror. Who could be on the threshold? And finally he realized that what was bothering him was that he couldn't just disappear like that. It wouldn't happen. He didn't want to be just a victim anymore. When Artyom came home, he was completely different from how he had left in the morning. His clothes were soaked in dirt. There were traces of bruises and abrasions on his body, and his eyes were dull and lifeless. He didn't even notice how he entered the apartment and approached his mother, who was sitting at the kitchen table. "Artyom, what's wrong with you?" Her voice was alarmed. "Why are you like this? Where have you been?" He didn't answer right away. His head was buzzing, and his body was still shaking from pain and cold. But something inside him told him that he couldn't remain silent any longer. He couldn't hide all this. "Mom," his voice broke and he paused. "This isn't the first time. They beat me, offend me, humiliate me every day. Gosha, Vadim, Rusik, they are always after me. Today again, they threw stones at me. I could barely stand on my feet. No one helps at school. The teacher does nothing. Even the principal ignores me. It's unbearable." His mother, hearing this, sat down as if knocked down. Her face was not just astonishment. Deep anxiety was visible. She immediately stood up and went into the other room, where her husband was. A few minutes later, Artyom's father came out, his face clearly reflecting confusion. He was not ready for this conversation, but he had no choice. His son was suffering, and it was obvious. "We can't just sit and watch this," the father said. "We have to do something. I'll call the police. This is not just a child's prank, it's a crime." And so they did. The parents called the police, told them about what was happening at school, how their son was being systematically beaten and humiliated, and how the school administration was completely ignoring the problem. The police promised an investigation, and soon 2 officers arrived at the school for an inspection and questioning. But the situation, as it turned out, only got worse. The next day, as soon as Artyom came to school, everything was not as usual. This was not the usual humiliation or ridicule. This time he was surrounded not only by his offenders, but also by other students who had also fallen under the influence of the crowd. "Look who's here," Gosha said, seeing him in the corridor. "The boy who complained to the police. You didn't think it would end badly, did you?" Tinted glances, mockery, and here they are again, Vadim and Rusik. Everything was as before, only this time they approached him with even more contempt. "Haven't you thought that you only made your life more difficult? We will punish you for this." Vadim grinned. And then the thought flashed through Artyom's head that everything would only get worse. He already felt how this nightmare was sucking him in. Later, during the break, the situation became even more aggressive. The lessons did not stop for Artyom, and all he could do was try to avoid attention. But his offenders did not give him a chance. At that moment, those who seemed to be supposed to help arrived. The school principal and the teacher, who were finally called in for a talk in connection with the complaints. But instead of support, they showed only empty promises that everything would be sorted out. However, their eyes gave away much more. It became clear to Artyom that they had no desire to solve the problem. On the contrary, they made it clear to him that it would only increase his suffering. So he found himself back in his corner, this time with even greater isolation and loneliness. He felt that his case was not just a personal tragedy, but part of something more terrible that existed in this system. Everything was now perceived as punishment for his desire to receive even the slightest help. On the way back home, barely surviving until the moment when he opened the door of his apartment, he felt something breaking inside him. His mother met him, but there was no determination in her eyes that had been there before. "I knew it," Artyom whispered, barely holding himself together. "You are not alone, Artyom." His mother hugged him, trying to console him. "We will all go through this together." But despite the words of support, he knew that changes would not happen. Everything was beyond the pale. After the police intervened and the school continued to ignore the problem, Artyom realized that he could no longer remain a passive observer. He was tired and broken, but something had changed in his soul. He knew that he needed to find other ways to regain his strength and confidence. But how? In one of his conversations with his mother, she mentioned that there was a fight club in the neighboring area that taught self-defense and martial arts. It was the only place where, according to her, one could not only learn to fight, but also develop inner strength and confidence. And Artyom made a decision. He had to try. He signed up for the fight club. The first week was hard. He was not used to physical exercise and discipline. But with each passing day, he became stronger, not only physically, but also internally. He learned restraint, respect for himself and others, and how to manage his anger. There were different people in the fight club, those who came just to learn how to defend themselves, and those who wanted to develop themselves. But they were all united by one thing: the desire to become the best versions of themselves. Several months passed. Artyom gained confidence, his body became stronger, and his mind became more resilient. He was no longer that helpless boy who everyone could bully. He was ready to defend himself and not allow himself to be humiliated. One day, after another training session, he found himself face to face with those who had previously made his life unbearable. Gosha, Vadim, and Rusik appeared on the horizon again, expecting Artyom to be weak, as before. But now everything was different. "Well, pig," said Gosha mockingly, "do you want to complain again?" Artyom looked at them, and a confident smile appeared on his face. "I am no longer the one who will be afraid of you," he said firmly. Instead of reacting with aggression, Artyom simply began to speak calmly and confidently, showing that he was not afraid of their threats. This was the most powerful weapon. He used everything he had learned during this time. Not physical strength, but internal strength. It turned out to be a much more powerful blow than any stone or hand-to-hand combat. "I will not tolerate your behavior any longer," Artyom continued, "and you will not be able to break me. If you want to continue to behave like this, that is your problem, but you will not get fear from me. I will not be afraid." Gosha and his friends, surprised by his answer, did not know how to react. They tried to find weak points, but their attempts did not bring results. Artyom stood firm, and this broke their usual pattern of behavior. At that moment, they realized that they could no longer control him. Little by little, they began to retreat, and Artyom was in no hurry to leave. He understood that his strength was not only physical improvement, but also strength of spirit. And so after some time, when his classmates realized that Artyom was no longer someone who could be offended, their attitude towards him changed dramatically. He was respected, listened to. He became an example for others. He did not take revenge, did not arrange reprisals, but simply showed that you can be strong without resorting to violence. He realized that strength is not only in fists. True strength is in the ability to be yourself, maintain dignity, and respect others, despite everything.